Imagine waking up one day to find your own driveway blocked by a massive fence, with no warning and no explanation. That's exactly what happened to me, and little did the HOA know, they just kicked off a battle that would turn my life upside down. They thought they could get away with it, but what they didn't count on was me fighting back. For months, I tried to reason with them, but their attitude was clear. They didn't care. My driveway was my property, and this fence was an obvious violation. So I did what any frustrated homeowner would do. I sued them. The stakes were high, but I wasn't about to let them win. I wanted justice, and I wasn't going to stop until I got it. But it didn't end there. After winning the lawsuit, I found a way to turn the tables in the most unexpected way. The HOA's clubhouse. Well, let's just say it didn't remain a clubhouse for long. How did I pull this off? Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next part of this story. It all started when I first moved into my home. I was excited to settle down in a quiet neighborhood, where I thought I could finally relax and enjoy the simple things in life. But the Homeowners Association, or HOA, had other plans. From the beginning, I had heard stories about their strict rules, but I never thought it would affect me directly. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I kept up my lawn, followed the guidelines, and paid my dues. Yet, somehow, the HOA always seemed to find something to complain about. One day, I noticed a construction crew on my street. I thought they were working on a neighbor's property, but when I got home that afternoon, I saw it. The fence. A tall, ugly barrier blocking my driveway, making it nearly impossible to park. My first instinct was to ask the HOA what was going on, but when I called their office, I was met with silence. No response. It wasn't until I found a notice taped to my door that I realized they'd approved the fence without any warning or approval from me. I couldn't believe it. They didn't even have the decency to let me know. I started to wonder how far they were willing to go, and that's when I made the decision that would change everything. But was it too late to fight back? Would they just double down? I had no idea what I was getting myself into. At first, I thought maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe the HOA didn't realize what they'd done. So I reached out to a few of my neighbors, hoping they'd share my frustration or at least help me figure out what was going on. To my surprise, most of them were too scared to speak up. The HOA knows best, one neighbor said, almost nervously. It was as if everyone in the neighborhood had been conditioned to accept the HOA's decisions without question. It made me feel like I was the only one willing to stand up to them. I called a lawyer, hoping to get some advice on what to do next. The lawyer's face dropped when I explained the situation. "You've got a solid case," he said, "but this won't be easy. HOAs have a lot of power. They might retaliate." That word, retaliate, stuck with me. Retaliation was something I'd never even considered. I had no idea how far they'd go to keep their authority intact, but now I was starting to realize how deep the conflict could run. I began to dig into the HOA's past. They had a reputation for being ruthless. One homeowner had mentioned they'd been fined for something as small as a misplaced mailbox. But even with all the stories and warning signs, I couldn't back down. My driveway was blocked, my rights violated, and no one seemed to care. Then things got even worse. Late one night, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out my window and saw a few HOA members standing around the fence, whispering. It was like they were planning something. But what? That's when I realized the stakes were higher than just a fence. I was dealing with an organization that wasn't afraid to fight dirty, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what would happen next. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and rising tension. The HOA didn't respond to my lawyer's letters, and my calls were either ignored or brushed off. I knew I had to take action, but every move I made felt like I was walking on thin ice. If I went public, would the HOA retaliate even harder? What if they found a way to escalate things, make my life even more difficult? But I wasn't about to back down now. After some digging, I learned that the HOA had been getting bolder over the years, pushing their boundaries more than ever before. There were rumors, whispers, really, that some homeowners had been bullied into selling their properties or facing absurd fines for the most trivial things. And I realized the HOA wasn't just blocking my driveway. They were trying to establish dominance, to show everyone who was in charge. I wasn't going to let them win. I doubled down, gathering more evidence, reaching out to others who had been wronged by the HOA, and even documenting the growing hostility I was facing. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how dangerous this situation had become. But the real turning point came when I got a call from my lawyer. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The HOA's lawyer just proposed a meeting. They want to settle." But something didn't feel right. It was too easy. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't an offer to end the conflict, it was a trap. I needed to know exactly what they were up to. I had to be ready for whatever came next. I was hesitant about the meeting. It didn't feel like the resolution I'd hoped for, but I decided to go, thinking I could at least get some clarity on the situation. I arrived at their office, a sleek, cold building that felt more like a fortress than a place for discussion. The HOA's lawyer was waiting for me, along with a couple of board members I'd never seen before. They smiled at me, but there was something off in their eyes, like they knew something I didn't. "We want to settle this," the lawyer said, pushing a stack of papers across the table. "But we have one condition. We want you to sign this." It was a non-disclosure agreement. At first, I thought it was a standard part of the process, but as I skimmed through the document, something caught my eye. There was a clause that gave the HOA complete control of the properties on the block, effectively silencing anyone who might try to stand up to them in the future. It was a power grab disguised as a settlement. My gut sank. This wasn't a resolution. It was a trap, a way to make sure no one could challenge them ever again. I was about to reject it when I noticed something even more disturbing. A mention of my own house, specifying how they planned to rectify the situation with my driveway. It was clear they had something more drastic in mind than just a fence. I stood up, heart racing, but before I could leave, one of the board members leaned forward. "You don't want to make this harder than it has to be. You really think you can win this fight? You're outmatched." It was an empty threat, but it made me realize how far they were willing to go to crush anyone who dared to challenge them. They weren't just protecting their turf, they were trying to bury me. I walked out, but the weight of what I just learned was almost unbearable. The game had changed, and I was in deeper than I ever expected. I left the meeting with my heart pounding in my chest. The feeling of betrayal weighed heavily on me, and as I drove home, the thought of what I'd just discovered ran through my mind over and over. They weren't just trying to intimidate me, they were trying to silence me forever. The clause in that document was the final straw. It was clear that HOA had grown too comfortable with their power, and now they were trying to make sure I could never fight back. I couldn't let that happen. I knew the only way to beat them at their own game was to turn the tables in the most unexpected way. I called my lawyer and told him everything. "It's time," I said. We would go to court, but we needed to hit them hard. We filed a counterclaim, accusing the HOA of trying to enforce illegal clauses and abusing their power. The evidence was stacked against them, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. They'd fight dirty, no doubt about it. Weeks passed in a blur of preparation and mounting pressure. The HOA didn't take kindly to being challenged, and they made sure I felt every bit of their retaliation. But nothing could prepare me for the day of the trial. As I stood in front of the judge, ready to present my case, something completely unexpected happened. Just as we were about to begin, the judge suddenly paused. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing me, "before we proceed, we've just received an emergency filing from the HOA." My stomach dropped. What now? It was then that the twist hit like a freight train. The HOA's lawyer had suddenly admitted that they had illegally altered records related to my property. Not only that, but they had been secretly plotting to seize properties in the neighborhood to build luxury developments for themselves. They'd been using their position to bully homeowners into submission, and my case was the tipping point. The courtroom was silent for a moment, and then everything exploded. The HOA's representatives were immediately escorted out of the courtroom. I'd won, big time. Not just the lawsuit over the fence, but the entire power structure of the HOA was about to crumble. As I left the courthouse, I felt a rush of relief. The battle was over, or so I thought.